if everybody else is coming, but
I would assume we had more last week unless
yeah.
we disenchanted them.
Okay, here comes.
So I was telling Ruth Ann and Steve this morning, I got an email from a friend, and she was talking about the number 40 and how relevant it is to everything that's going on right now.
And did she have everything going on right now?
Well, and how relevant it was to everything that's happened in the past. And she was talking about Moses and the 40 days on the mountain and the 40 years wandering the desert and the 40 days that Christ, I don't know what that was. But how relevant, this is the year 2020, and the number 40 means change.
Means what?
Change.
Pain?
Change.
Change?
Yeah.
40 means change?
Yeah.
In
And
which language?
No, but numerically, every time there was a 40 something happening, there was a change. I don't know, it's interesting.
Oh, okay. My more or the explanation or the illustration that I like better, talking about 40, at least certainly in the Torah, is when you remember that the Torah and all of that early literature was handed down for thousands of years, was handed down orally rather than being written down. And we human beings tend to sometimes either intentionally or inadvertently not hear things exactly as the way that the speaker intended them to be heard, right? Remember, I tell students when especially the younger ones, remember the game telephone?
Yeah.
That if you started one person and then that person whispers to another person and it goes around the room, that by the time it gets to the end of the circle, has nothing to do with what the original sentence or even one word might have been. So if you remember that Torah, as an example, was the oral document, and the storyteller was talking about the number of days that it rained in Noah and the flood, or as you said, the number of days that Moses is on top of Mount Sinai, or the children of Israel walked and wandered in the desert. The number in Hebrew, the sound of the number 40 is very similar to just the word that means many. So there's arba'im and there's rabim, and if you're just listening to it and trying to hear everything and every detail that the storyteller or the narrator is giving, wait, what did he say? Did he say 40 or did he say many? I'm not really sure. And it takes 2 or 3 sentences later, by the time that you're thinking back of what it was, is it really important? Was it 40 or was it just a generic number, many? So I prefer that kind of statement. Like I think we said last week also, that when they talk about years as in the Torah, it's not necessarily a 365-day year. The Hebrew word shanim also means change. That's changes, and then or seasons, if you will. There even may have been months. Every time that there was a distinguishable change that the people could identify, they marked that with the Hebrew word shana, which we later on translate as year, but it may have meant something totally different to them. So, I mean, it's cute. You can play lots of gematria things with the number 2020, with 40, and do that. And if it helps her in this crisis, then by all means, then do it.
I was thinking it was interesting until she got to the point about Christ and his coming, and I said, okay, that's it. When I stopped.
Okay, all right. if it foretells for her, then that's fine.
Exactly.
Right.
Well, whenever you're ready, I don't know, I'll let people in if anybody shows up, but, you know,
Okay. Again, because I'm on an iPad, so it's hard for me. Once we get more than 8 or 9 people, it's hard for me to tell how many people are actually here. So,
we are 8 currently.
okay. Welcome everybody.
Well,
Welcome.
Welcome. Hope that you're handling the situation as well as can be expected, and that you're healthy and safe. So we wanted to pick up a little bit, or not just a little bit. We wanted to pick up today and focus specifically on what's called the Omer, or the Sphira, the period between Pesach or Passover and Shavuot, the feast of weeks, or the spring harvest. I wanted to give you, as is the purpose of this particular class, some background, some insights, some things that you may not have known about the festivals and the calendar and the way we observe it. So I thought we would spend some time on the Omer and that counting period, on the fast, the whole idea of fast days. I don't mean speedy, I mean days of abstaining and of not eating, and where that custom comes from and how it plays out, especially with some of the dates over the summer. And then we'll conclude this part of the entire curriculum or program talk with some things that you may not have realized about Shabbat, which in traditional Judaism, Shabbat is even more important than Yom Kippur. It may not seem that way for us today, and we'll talk a little bit more about it, because Shabbat has basically been overtaken by becoming a part of the weekend, and just time for doing things a little bit differently rather than the weekday. Although, again, in the situation in which we find ourselves right now, there's probably not much different for a lot of people between weekdays and Sabbaths, days off and days of rest and whatever. But some things that I wanted to share, and then a couple of questions as we prepare to go on, assuming that we're going to continue and spend some time on Thursday afternoons together. Okay, so Passover, we remember, begins on the 14th day of the spring month, later on known as Nisan, but in the Torah it's only the spring month. And then they start this period of counting. You could make sermonic interpretation about not only counting but being accountable, between starting as of the second day of Passover and running all the way until Shavuot, which is a period of 50 days. You count specifically as of the evening of the second day of Passover, and then you count 7 times 7. We're talking about the numbers, 40, but here, as we said last week, Sheva or Sheva Shavuot, 7 weeks, 7 times 7 makes for the 49 days between the beginning of Passover, or the second day of Passover, and the spring barley harvest. It's not called Shavuot in the Torah. It's known as Chag HaBikurim, the festival of the first fruits, or Atzeret, the stopping time, the end of the harvest, if you will. So those 49 days, it's called the Omer because in the Torah, the children of Israel are told during this time period to daily bring a measure, and that's what the word Omer is. It's a particular measure. I can't tell you exactly how much it might be in our measurements today, but it was a specific measure that each individual was to bring to the temple. And actually, you were to bring this omer, this measure of barley or some representative produce from your field, and you were supposed to donate it or contribute it at the temple when there wasn't a temple in existence, and we'll be referring to that a couple times today. When there wasn't the temple in existence, you would still somehow bring it to whatever, either an authority figure, a priest, a rabbi, once they started having rabbis, but you would make this contribution before you could eat of the offering, eat of the barley yourself. So it was a gesture that was made, and you might even remember there's a description of a particular vow and a particular, I call it the Pledge of Allegiance of the Israelite people, that when they brought the first fruits, or when they brought the prime examples of their produce in a basket and laid it before the high priest, and then recited a particular, again, what I call the oath of allegiance, or the Pledge of Allegiance. And you might remember it because in whatever format we had our Seder a few weeks ago for Passover, we recited the same words. Avi Arami Oved, a wandering Aramean was my father, and he descended down into Egypt and dwelt there in meager numbers, and then they became, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that history lesson is what you were supposed to bring and recite every time that you brought this festive offering at the temple, if you will. And people would do that for 49 days, 49 times. Why did they focus on those 49 times? According to the Midrash specifically, and if you want to take the time and go through your Torah text and add up all the days, that the 49 days between leaving Egypt and then arriving at Mount Sinai. That's how they came up. But that's a midrash. That's not the official text. Okay. So what happens during this counting time, which originally was identified with the agricultural harvest, but later on became a time identified of sadness. The first connection is related to a tragedy in Israelite Jewish history, that some 12,000 students of Rabbi Akiva died during this 49-day period, during these weeks. It may have been a plague, to make a connection to our present day. It may have been, and some of the interpretations, as with the destruction of the temple, it may have been because there was bad blood and there wasn't enough respect. It's what they call sinat chinam, or baseless hatred, between some of the different sects, some of the different schools of thought. But most likely, most historians and scholars would say that 12,000 students, disciples of Rabbi Akiva, most likely were killed because they were identified in either whether there was battle or whether they were being punished, that they had aligned themselves with Rabbi Akiva in the Bar Kokhba revolt against the Syrians. So the whichever way you want to see it, it's certainly a sad time. It's a time of great pain. and tragedy for many of the leaders of the children of Israel at that time. Then coincidentally, and whether it actually happened this way or whether it's revisionist history, I will leave that up to those who are more scholarly than I. But throughout history, many of the well-known and not so well-known anti-Semitic attacks, including the Crusades, pogroms closer to our own day, many of them were either coordinated to occur in this time period when the Jewish people were already sad and already observing periods of sadness and withdrawing from participation in the larger community, or because coincidentally Easter usually came about near the beginning of this 50-day, 49-day, 50-day period, and many of the anti-Semitic preachers would be exhorting their congregations to go out after the Jews because of what had been done to Jesus. And as a result, then, in the couple of weeks right after Easter, irrespective of Passover, because of the couple of weeks right after Easter is when many of these mobs, or many of the the Cossacks or the pogroms or whatever might because they had been so worked up by their religious leaders talking in terms of the anti-Semitic themes. So that also may have led to identifying this particular period between Passover and Shavuot as a time of great tragedy in Jewish history. For whatever reason initially, and all we can do now in 2020 or 5780 is make our official connection that we're not supposed to cut our hair during these 7 weeks.
Oh, that worked out good.
You really didn't know that inadvertently you were participating in an old custom of the Jewish people. Similarly, there were not supposed to be public celebrations of joy. You probably are aware there weren't supposed to be weddings. There weren't, you can't avoid a bris or something like that, but you weren't supposed to schedule weddings or any other kind of celebration during these 7 weeks, with the exception of the 33rd day out of the 49. That's Lag BaOmer. Lamed Gimel stands for 30. Gimel stands for 3. So if you put it together, that's the Lag BaOmer 33, the 33rd day of counting the Omer, which always works out to be the 18th day. There's 18, which is a good gematria number that means life. The 18th day of the month of Iyar, which is the month in which we will be beginning tomorrow night. That's Rosh Chodesh, the beginning of Iyar. There's on the 33rd day on Lag BaOmer, there's another observance that is now celebrated or commemorated in Israel, especially on the 33rd day. I mean, we had talked about Maimunia. We had talked about that celebration that the Moroccans, the Sephardim, had brought for the end of Passover, the day after Passover. Many of the Sephardic community also observe Lag BaOmer, the 33rd of the counting of the Omer, or the 18th day of Iyar, as the yahrzeit, as the memorial, the anniversary of the death of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who was the alleged author of the Zohar. If you've studied any Kabbalah, you know about the Zohar. And if you've studied it with any sense of critical scholarship, you know very well that Shimon Bar Yochai was not the author of the Zohar, but mystically he was given credit for that, and his yard site is observed throughout Israel. They do campfires, not really campfires, bonfires, big fires. There's pilgrimage to one of the mountains that's rises up out of the valley just west of the city of Tzfat, called Mount Miron. And I had the opportunity once. I don't know if any of you, the rest of you, ever had this opportunity, but I had the opportunity once of doing that pilgrimage and making that march late at night and climbing up to the top of the mountain, where there are these huge bonfires, and the Sephardic community participate. They stay up all night and they sing. Of course, after all this time, they want to be able to rejoice. It's the only day. Well, technically, some communities also allow rejoicing or weddings on Rosh Chodesh, on the first day of the new month of Sivan, which will be now closer to Shavuot itself. Steve, it looks like have you ever done a Mount Miron?
No, I was
Lagomer
just
celebration?
wondering. No, but the campfire, the big bonfires, was
Yeah.
a very big thing among the kids in Israel. You know, I discovered that when I came with my family to Israel. There were giant bonfires all over the place. The fire department was very busy.
Oh, right. In every valley.
You know, where the kids choose to build a fire isn't always necessarily a safe place to build a fire. But
Right.
I just had a question specifically what the origin of the bonfire custom was. I mean, we celebrate in all sorts of ways, but this was clearly, and part of the celebration, they told me to bring potatoes. And once the fire had burned down, you would put potatoes in the ashes and
Exactly.
potatoes. That was a little kind of snack. That was part of it.
I'm not familiar with any particular reference to the bonfire or the campfire. I think it's just because they were staying up all night and it might get a little chilly. I don't know of anything else. I'll see if I can find out something more. But it's a very, very popular thing all over Israel. Began as a Sephardic custom, but now the Scouts, which is a very big organization in Israel, the Scouts do a lot of those kind of bonfires. And
the fire scouts, there were fire scouts, and they were putting out those fires too, together with the fire department.
Right. Right.
As soon as you build one, the fire department would be on top
okay.
putting it out.
So having said all that, and in discussing about the counting, because we did talk about Shavuot at the 50th day. We did talk about that last week. So those are some comments about the Omer and counting the Omer. I want to also give some background into the Jewish concept of fasting, because as we get into the summertime, with the fasts that are specifically designated in our summer calendar, and then of course preparing for the great fast, which is Yom Kippur. So what does this all mean? In the Torah specifically, fasting as we define it, of not eating, that's not necessarily the way that the Torah describes this particular observance. By the time of the Mishnah, which would be, let's say, 2,400, 2,500 years ago, by that time, yes, there's been a focus on what the Torah refers to as self-denial, or abstaining from a number of practices. But by the time of the Mishnah, and then certainly the couple hundred years after that, the time of the rabbinic period and in the Talmud, by that the focus has really been, self-denial has really been then defined as fasting, not eating, not drinking, not participating in any particular personal acts of what we would call a vanity. Not, I think we mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, not hygiene. I mean, they wouldn't say don't brush your teeth. They would say use a little drop of water if possible when you brush your teeth. And again, going back to the reference about hair, is don't spend a lot of time brushing your hair, combing your hair, whatever. So those are the things that you're supposed to abstain from, as well as sexual behavior and other things. But things that might bring personal pleasure, those are how the rabbinic period identifies the self-denial that the Torah talks about. In the Torah, there were really two times or two motivating factors for this, a day or a period of self-denial. One was when danger threatened. So if it was a matter of national emergency, national crisis, of everyone bonding together and making some kind of a publicly visible unifying gesture. We will all fast. We will all do this. We will all wear certain clothes, or whatever it might be. So there was the time of national danger or threat. And then the other times when you practiced self-denial was as a call, and this is the one that we're more familiar with, was as a call to penitence, as a call to repentance, as a call to acknowledge what one of my professors in rabbinic school called the finitude of life, recognizing that we are all finite, that we are all mortal, that we will make mistakes, that we will err, that we will sin, however you want to describe that. That's conversation for a different lecture or different class discussion, if you will. But this self-denial makes us more aware of our own humanness. Ideally humanity, but humanity coming out of humanness, that we will die, that we will suffer, that we recognize pain, that we acknowledge that there are times when we have to look deep within ourselves. So rabbinically, again, not so much in the Torah, because the Torah just talks about this is what you should not do, or this is what you refrain from doing at such and such a time. But by the time of the Mishnah and Talmud, 2,300, 400 years ago, the different fasts are categorized into three different types. There's the obligatory public fast. If you are a member of the tribe, what is that, MOT, if you are if you identify yourself as a Jewish person, then you should do such, and you should fast, you should practice self-denial on these particular days when tradition commands you to, whether it's a mitzvah, whether it's God's commandment, whether it comes from, as Tevye would say, tradition. This is what we do. So the first is the obligatory public fast. The second is a public fast that, as I was mentioning before, that might be related to a special occasion or to a particular public civic threat. That if you are a member of the Jewish community, now is a time do we join together as one voice or as one people by performing this act or refraining from performing this particular act in response to a threat. Okay, let everyone, you can even picture, you can think back to times in history when everyone rally around, we will all fast. The prime example is with Esther in the story of Purim, that let everyone fast until Esther goes into the king and asks permission to override Haman's edict. Boo. Okay, and then the third type of fast that the rabbis talk about is the private fast. So working backwards, the private fast is based on my or your or anyone individual's vow, and that's an intentional word because the vow again was related to, we talked about the play on words for Shavuot. So someone who makes a vow or a promise. Now in the there's another word, the word is neder. That's a different kind of word, and we for a term for a vow or a promise. We know that word from what's the most important prayer on Yom Kippur? It's not really a prayer.
Kol Nidre.
What's the most important formula?
Kol
Kol
Nidre.
Nidre. All of these vows which we have recited or have been recited or promulgated for us. So there's the Shavuah, which relates to the conversation we've been talking about now. That's the play on words for 7 or a promise and a week and all those together. Or there's neder, which is a vow or a promise of something that we will or will not do. Called nidre is like making a particular taking an oath in a court, and that's the way that Kol Nidre is played out in the pageantry of Yom Kippur, is that we stand in front of the Torah scrolls, and the prayer is that God will accept our words, but the formula is actually a legalistic formula absolving us of those particular vows that we may or may not have recited, whether we recited them intentionally or unintentionally from the year past up until now, and from now till Yom Kippur Haba, until next Yom Kippur, etc., etc., etc. So there are those individual vows. The best example that I could give, if you're familiar with the, it's a story or an encounter, I guess, with what's called in the Torah a Nazir, the Nazarite. Now, not the Nazarene. That's Jesus from Nazareth. So not the Nazarene, but a Nazarite in the Torah, one who claims the status of a Nazir, which is a voluntary, and it could be male or female, incidentally, a voluntary oath of withdrawing from the community, monastic, and of fasting, and of not participating in sexual behavior, and not cutting your hair, and not drinking any intoxicating liquor and whatever. The primary example from later literature is a guy named Samson, right? Although Samson wasn't a voluntary Nazir, a voluntary Nazarite, his parents, with God's encouragement, his parents designated him as a Nazir. But a Nazir, technically a Nazarite, it takes a voluntary oath. And it was temporary. It wasn't permanent by any means, but to abstain from all of these things, including fasting, including withdrawing from the community, self-quarantine, if you will, not social distancing, but quarantining, and avoiding intoxicating liquor, avoiding getting your hair cut. And again, look at the story of Samson if you're unfamiliar with that. So that was one individual vow that goes along with this notion, the category of a private fast. Another is one in which I personally just participated a month ago, and that's the fast of the firstborn on the day before the first Seder. So firstborn sons, that's if it's the son who opened the mother's womb, voluntarily fast out of empathy with the Egyptian firstborn sons who were killed as the 10th plague. There's another voluntary fast, if you will. Some of you may have participated in this, may know about it, that technically the bride and groom are supposed to fast on the day of their wedding. Matter of fact, the day leading up to the wedding, because the wedding would only take place, again, picture the candlelight procession and Fiddler on the Roof, but the wedding ceremony would take place in the evening. So on the daytime, it's not a 24-hour fast, it's a daytime fast for bride and groom, probably so that the bride would be able to fit into her wedding gown a little bit better, and so that the groom it would be much easier to get him drunk. Because as everybody started to toast him, and then he would still be able to go ahead and get married rather than getting cold feet. Anyway, that's Bala Boston. That's not. But the bride and groom are supposed to treat the day leading up to their wedding as a Yom Kippur. If he were worked this way, picture doing it like with small letters rather than capital letters. Not capital Y, capital K for Yom Kippur, but with a small Y and a small K. Hebrew doesn't work that way, but picture it that way. That it's as if it's a minor Yom Kippur is the day before your wedding. Another one that you may be familiar with was that people would choose or opt to fast on their parents' yahrzeit. That was a European Russian custom. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with that. I had forgotten about that from years and years ago, actually. My next door neighbors growing up in Cleveland had told me about that. And then the final one, and God forbid that any of you were involved in this one, is if you're carrying a Torah scroll, a Sefer Torah, and if it falls, okay, and if it falls, then you're supposed to fast. Not only you, if you're the one who's carrying the Torah, but if you witness some of the Torah falling onto the ground, then you're supposed to fast. Later on, communities, it must have happened frequently, and later communities said, okay, here's how you can avoid fasting. You can study Torah. You can devote yourself to Torah for a particular time period, 30 days or whatever it might be. Go ahead, Steve. Steve's one of the people that I can see on my screen, so he raises his hand. Okay. If anybody else has a question or a comment, feel free, just jump in. Or Dan or somebody else can see it.
You mentioned 40 days of fasting for dropping the Torah. We have actually had several close calls.
Yeah.
Until we figured out that there was one guy who could really be trusted to be a Hagba. We use the Hagba.
Well, it doesn't have to be in Hagba.
That would be Michael.
We had a situation on Simchat. Two comments. We had a situation on Simchat Torah that someone was going to be carrying, and the bima had as we do it in Beth Shalom Green Valley, had a few steps, and as he came down the steps, he tripped and lost his balance, and everyone went. But he was able to right himself, and held him up so that the Torah never touched the ground.
Yeah,
that was fine. Yeah, go ahead.
And if I may just share a real old joke about fasting days that probably everyone has already heard. A maid for a Jewish family was sitting with her friends, and they were sort of comparing notes. Esther, well, what's it like to work for the Jews? I mean, what are they really like? And the maid said, you know what? They're a little strange. They're a little strange. Most of the time, they will both eat and smoke in the dining room. But there are days when they eat in the dining room and they smoke in the bathroom. And then there's one day where they'll smoke in the dining room but eat in the bathroom. There's actually one day where they both smoke and eat in the bathroom.
In the bathroom, right. Okay. Okay. We could have saved that for a segue into Shabbat, but that's all right. Some of you have heard this little personal anecdote. I apologize if you've heard it before, but I use it as a discussion opener when I'm meeting new people, especially talking about what's your earliest memory that you can specifically identify as a Jewish memory. Okay. And the story that I tell for myself, my mother's father was one of the lay leaders. He was not a rabbi. He was one of the leaders of this small little Orthodox shul in Cleveland. And I couldn't have been more than 4 years old. I think I was only 3. And it was Simchat Torah, present pronunciation. And we were with him, and he was one of the leaders of this congregation. The whole congregation, the whole synagogue was probably half the size of Beth Shalom. It was a small little, almost like more like a converted house. But it's Simchat Torah, and because he was one of the elders of the congregation, he was honored with carrying a Torah, and he had the Torah in one hand and had me in the other hand. And he's dancing around, and he probably was in his 70s at the time. And until the day he died, he had a flaming red beard that came down to his pupik. And I to this day, I remember holding on, grasping on to that beard, because I sensed that if he was going to drop one of us, either the Torah or me, he was going to drop me rather than drop the Torah. And that's my earliest specifically Jewish memory in my life. So I don't know if anybody else wants to share. Would digress for a minute. If anybody has a memory you want to share, that's fine.
This question is interesting because I have many memories as a young child of, the Jewish experience. But right now, I'm going to think going forward in terms of what was my first one. I mean, that's a good thing to think about. So I will ponder that. And I may not have the answer immediately, but it's an interesting thing to think about.
A lot of people will automatically think of a Seder or a Shabbos dinner, something that's related to food or an aroma or something like that. Yeah.
Well, so in my process, and like I said, I'll filter it through later, but in my process of thinking, I definitely remember some very strong feelings related to when I was at Temple as a young child, and of course, different things at home. But I'll be darn right now if I can remember what came first, the chicken or the egg. Seriously. But good, something to think about.
Okay, enjoy.
We continue. Thank you.
Enjoy.
Thanks, Rabbi. Okay.
All right. So we'll interrupt me at any time, but so we'll go back to so those are some of the private moments that lead to fasting, or the voluntary fast, the private fast. Obviously, at the time of a death, people would tear their clothes, which we now do, like cutting with a button or something like that, or making a slice in their coat, and then you might think that there would be specifically fasting or self-denial. But on the other hand, the rabbis and some would say with a great deal of psychological insight said, yes, you may fast, you may choose not to do anything that would smack or be interpreted as celebrating when someone has died. But after we come back from the cemetery, there's not only the tradition, but it's a mitzvah, it's a commandment to sit down for a meal. Doesn't have to be a big meal, but seudat havra'ah, the meal of coming back to health. So lahavdil, as we say, the opposite of, rather than using fasting as a symbol or as a ritual of grieving, Judaism specifically says, no, you start to take care of yourself, which is indicated by that you must eat something rather than refrain from eating. Okay, so then the other type of fast, and whether it's publicly mandated or just suggested, but runs the gamut, that includes some, and this is why we're doing this today, that includes some of the particular fast days of this time of year, from now until I'm not sure how much hotter it's going to get here, but into the hot days
Just wait.
of the summer. Just wait, right? Okay.
Hi.
Somebody said this is the earliest that they remember of getting this hot, if it's going to be 100 in the next couple of days anyway. Well, okay.
Almost.
So in order that we will be approaching them, we will be encountering, we've already encountered the 10th of Tevet, which was the 10th month. Now, don't forget, we are just ending, technically, in the counting of the months in the Hebrew calendar, we're just ending the first month. Okay? Nisan, the spring month, in which we find Passover and the ceremony to ordain the priests or to coronate a king or acknowledge or bless a prophet. Those all would take place in the spring month, which is the first month. It's not the month that we talk about. The next time would be 5781. That for next Rosh Hashanah, wherever we are that we observe it, but that'll be 5781. But that's Tishrei, that's the 7th month. So we are now finishing month number 1. The month of Tevet came 2 months before that. And in the 10th day of Tevet is a fast day historically and traditionally, because it marks the day of the siege of Jerusalem began 722 BCE by the Assyrians. Then the next one that we will be encountering is the one right around then also would be the fast of Esther, and that story we talked about a little bit. As Esther and Mordecai, Esther asks Mordecai, Mordecai asks all the Jewish people to fast on Esther's behalf, that Ahasuerus will respond positively when she approaches him. There's no prayer specifically identified with that particular fast. If you might remember that God is not mentioned at all in the Megillah, in the scroll of Esther. God's name is not mentioned. So it wouldn't be appropriate to turn the Esther's fast into a prayerful mode for God. It's one of these national schemes, national public display of identifying with the people. Okay, coming up now into the summer, the 17th of Tammuz, which specifically talks about the beginning of the siege of Jerusalem by the Romans in the year 70 of the common era, that leads into then a 3-week. That's a 3-week period that leads up to Tisha B'Av, the ninth day of Av. Tisha B'Av, so make sure that I had all my notes here. Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av, which was the day that Jerusalem falls. Traditionally, according to the biblical text, the temple is destroyed both times. By the Assyrians and then by the Romans, and then again whether it actually happened on those dates or whether in a sadistic way the perpetrators of hatred against our people throughout history knew of that particular date and they wanted to correlate their attacks or their persecutions to that date, or whether then we would call revisionist history added after the fact and added the connections between these tragedies onto the date of the ninth day of Av. So you'll find in the literature everything from, of course, the first one being even before the destruction of the temples, that the 9th day of Av was the day, according to some of the texts, was the day that the spies. Remember, Moses had sent out spies or scouts to traverse the land and see whether or not the Israelites would be able to conquer it. And that 10 of the spies came back with a negative report. No, we look like grasshoppers in their eyes. And Joshua and Caleb were the only ones who came back and said to Moses and the people, no, God is with us. Yes, we can conquer the land. But the negative report and and God's response to Moses and to the people for listening to the negative report that apparently occurred on the 9th of Av, according to tradition. Then, as we say, the temple being destroyed both times, and then later on, 1290, when the Jews are expelled from England, 1492, when the Jews are expelled from Spain and Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula, into the 1800s, the Khmelnytsky massacre and the pogroms, many of which, whether they actually took place on the 9th of Av or it becomes a day of commemoration, like as we said, we just commemorated this week the one day that's marked as Yom HaShoah V'Hagvura, the Holocaust Memorial Holocaust and Heroism Day, as determined by the State of Israel to be acknowledged throughout the world. I neglected to mention on the 17th of Tammuz, since they were looking for earlier connection into the Torah, so that there's what the rabbis, certainly in the Midrash, what the rabbis would call a proof text. As I said, that the 9th of Av was the day that the 10 spies came back with a pessimistic report. According to an interpretation of the Torah, 17th of Tammuz, which is 3 weeks before Tisha B'Av, the 17th of Tammuz was the day that Moses, coming down from the mountain the first time, that he destroys that he smashes the two tablets of stone. So again, they make that connection and try to say, rather than coming out of nowhere, where do we find these particular days? So there's the 17th of Tammuz that ushers in a 3-week period that's even more has more sadness in it than the entire time period between Pesach and Shavuot. And while in that earlier period, the counting period, the Sphira, the counting of the Omer, tradition certainly was that you didn't, as we said, you didn't have wedding ceremonies, you didn't have public moments of joy or things like that. That kind of has fallen by the wayside, certainly into modern conservative Judaism. But the 3-week period from the 17th of Tammuz into Tisha B'Av is still pretty much observed as a time of great sadness, personal reflection, and communal identity, nationalistic identity, not xenophobic, but nationalistic identity during those 3 weeks by most of the community. I would have to say, on behalf of most, certainly almost all conservative rabbis, the Orthodox notwithstanding, most conservative rabbis with whom I'm familiar, and even more than half Reform rabbis would say to a couple, a bride and groom, if they wanted to arrange a wedding that was going to be during that period, I think most Reform rabbis, based on my experience, would be saying, are you aware that's, and most people aren't, are you aware of this 3-week limitation or prohibition against having wedding ceremonies? And while you may choose to still have your ceremony during that time period, please know that you would be offending more traditional members of your family. If you have members of the family who are Orthodox, they might say, no, we can't come to the wedding because it's during this time period. So those are still observed in that way. Okay, I'm looking at my notes here off to the side. That's talking about fasting. That's talking about the calendar that takes us up into the summer, because a few months ago when we got this started, we started with the high holy days, so that brings us full cycle in the festival cycle. But the one day that we really haven't talked about so much is Shabbat. So I'd like to do a couple of minutes talking about some little known facts, if you will, which was the motivation for this class anyway, of little known facts, the how, the why, the when, the what, of what we do with some of our observances. And that will take us through this particular section of the outline of where we're going. So Shabbat, of course, comes from the Hebrew, and most of you would remember that phrase, Uvayom hashvi'i Shabbat vayinafash, that on the 7th day God rested and was refreshed. So as God worked and labored in the period of creation for 6 days and then rested on the 7th, so is this amazing institution known as the Shabbat. It comes from the word that means to rest. There is, of course, voluminous literature on what does it mean to rest and how we interpret that. Or if you want to look at it conversely, there's voluminous literature on what it means to work. And if Shabbat means cessation from work, you have to know what it is that you're ceasing from doing, or how do you rest. Things that may have been considered work or labor, hundreds, if not tens of years ago, but certainly hundreds of thousands of years ago, may not be considered work anymore. I'll just use as an example what we have all just gone through, or what many of us are still in the process of trying to resolve in our own minds. So I remember back in the 1960s or maybe of 1970s, I remember the question being asked, one of my professors, you know, so if there's the first time that that we had astronauts circling the Earth, okay? So the question was, and this of course would never have been conceivable to the rabbis of old, or it would not have been foreseeable in the Torah text or the biblical text. So the question is asked, if we had an observant Jewish astronaut, okay, who's circling the Earth how many times per day? So each circuit is a day and a night. So does that observant Jew, and the assumption at that point was going to be a male, so I apologize to the women present with us, but does he have to put on his tefillin, you know, and daven 3 times a day, each circuit going around the Earth? And they had to start to deal with those kind of things. Today, and literally today, we have to decide if there are 10 of us all joining together in a class like this, or if we were doing a worship service, would that constitute a minyan? Okay. You know, those are legitimate questions that could never have been anticipated by the rabbis of old. Who would have even? I don't understand how it works now, much less hundreds of years ago, if they would have tried to anticipate or explain what this is all about. You know, there was just a couple of weeks ago, there was just major debate in Israel amongst some of the more moderate, I'll use that word, moderate Sephardic rabbis, who said that to have a Zoom Seder, and I'm going to assume that everybody now knows what that means, but there were some of the moderate Sephardic rabbis, Orthodox in Israel, who said that yes, even though Passover is considered you know, a day of no work, it's a holy day and whatever, like the Sabbath, but they said that yes, you can participate in a Zoom Seder, that fulfilling the mitzvah, the commandment of the Higadat Levincha, of to tell your son or your daughter on this day that it is as if I myself went out from Egypt, and eating the symbol and all that, and doing that on Zoom is more important. It's higher in the priority than the prohibition of not using electronics on Passover. So it does play out even today. Meridel, yes.
No, I was just talking to Jim. I'm sorry you walked by.
Oh, okay. No, that's all right. Jim. All right. Okay. All right. So, so the definition of rest and the definition of work, I would defer to the women who are logged in with us now as to whether or not pushing a baby carriage on Shabbat is that considered work? And is it considered work by the amount, by the number of calories that you expend when you're doing that? Is it considered work by the distance that you walk? You know, if you're just going to your next door neighbor's house, if you're going to grandma's house,
No.
is that still considered? Is it considered work and whatever. Marilyn had her hand up, then Steve.
And then me, Sherry.
Okay, and then Sherry.
You're going only if you're pushing that baby carriage uphill.
Oh, only uphill.
Only
Okay,
uphill.
Rabbi Beam says, but it's only if it's uphill. Okay. All right. Steve? Lost your audio.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yes, yeah.
okay, I unmuted myself. Isn't the specific expression though, kol malacha? It's not kol avodah, but kol malacha.
No, malacha is labor.
Which was be craft.
Yeah.
It may be like craft. And it's been explained to us, I don't recall exactly who. I think some rabbi who visited us, that it's basically what's defined as craft is anything that even remotely could have been a part of the efforts that were used to build the temple. Anything that was used to build the temple
Exactly.
is a craft.
Right.
And so you have to, those are the things that specifically have to be avoided. So, you know, pushing along your baby in a baby carriage, maybe that's okay, you know, but I guess lugging heavy things is more like something you would do, constructing the temple, breaking
Right.
stones,
Right.
you know, things like that.
There's
Or doing something creative, doing
Yeah.
something really creative, painting. That would be a no-no, you know, because
Right.
that's also craft.
Right. There's the famous list of 39 modes of craft, work, skilled labor, whatever you want to call it. And yes, the identification is that because those are the specific tasks that were associated with building the temple. Or that's where that phrase comes from. Right.
And now I don't know how the modern Orthodox determined that flicking on a light switch was something that was
Because you're
in any way similar
you're causing a fire to be burned.
a fire.
Right. You're causing, you know, so then it's a question of, is it okay? It's okay to have the Shabbos goy, to have somebody else do it for you, and you know, and whatever. But you see how there's legal fiction, but there's also legal interpretation, and as we know, Judaism has always been very, very, very tuned into including majority and minority opinion, and the lenient and the strict in interpretation, and both are presented when we go. Sherry, you wanted to add something before?
Yes. So my thought process on this is that, you know, one of the examples you gave earlier had to do with moderate thinking, you know, the rabbis or whomever. And that's the thing that I immediately jump to is if you're talking Orthodox, you know, that's like a different flavor almost, you know? So I know of that, I'm aware of that, but yet I have never been Orthodox. So to me, I know, you know, you're not supposed to like, you know, listen to music, you know, do things for entertainment. But then to me, talking about this, it's like, well, if you're real religious, that's one thing. Then it can be a big issue to decide, you know, to do it or not.
Well, and in all fairness,
but otherwise, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, in all fairness, Orthodoxy is not monolithic either. I mean, there
Correct.
are, you know, there are different degrees and different levels, and some of the as harsh as the criticisms of some Orthodox rabbis may be of the Reform and conservative movement,
Yeah.
the stronger words and accusations that they level are against other Orthodox rabbis.
Right.
Right,
And so,
okay.
right. But from my viewpoint, when I hear a discussion of this, for me, it's almost a non-question. For me, it's like, you're gonna take your baby in a stroller? Sure, why not? You know, that's my
Right,
thoughts.
right, okay.
My thing
ultimate-
is,
Go ahead.
I
Leanne, go ahead.
like all the ways the Orthodox get around the prohibitions that they have. I don't know how it would work out here in the suburbs with no overhead electrical wires.
No, a roof, right.
Exactly. But, you know, you talk about pushing the baby stroller. I mean, if, you know, you had to check in Friday night, make sure it was up. And if it was up, you know, you put your kid in the stroller and you went for the stroller.
Right.
I mean,
What she's describing is again one of these legal fictions. All right, that it's okay to be pushing the stroller, it's okay to be doing those things if you're within your own home. Okay?
Really?
And then how did they define home? Well, home became established and a little bit expanded into your neighborhood and defined, and they actually then would put up wires or use electric wires or put up a rope or something to designate this is your neighborhood. And as long as you're within the neighborhood, it's like being within your own home, you can push it. But if you go outside, then you're going too far and whatever. There are all these different measuring sticks.
but you still couldn't put up an umbrella in the rain
Why not?
because
Right.
you're building a home.
Right. You know, and you can't carry, you know, so what if you have to carry like we'll use the same, a diaper bag. You can't carry the diaper bag because carrying a burden was one of those 39 manners of labor that of skill that but you can, if you put it over your shoulder and you're wearing it, you can do that.
You
But
couldn't
can't
carry your house key.
Right, exactly. So you link it onto your belt loop. Things like that.
Wow.
Okay, all right.
Technicalities. Okay.
It's all technicality. Jeanette, did you want to say something?
Yeah, because I was taught that the Orthodox believed, and I was told it by an Orthodox person, the overall principle is you may not create or destroy on the Sabbath. That's what I learned long ago, far away in another country. You may not create nor destroy. So you can't switch the light on because you're creating energy. And you can't rip a piece of paper because you are destroying. It becomes the overall thing, and it's impossible to live that way. So it's okay to get other people to do it. Somebody can come turn your lights on for you before the Sabbath or after the Sabbath, but nothing was created during the Sabbath.
That's good. I've been a long time since I'd heard using the phrase that way, but absolutely that makes sense too. I'm being a little time conscious here, but when you say create and destroy, there are many phrases in Jewish literature, whether they're specifically talking about Shabbat or talking about other things, but the one that many of us are familiar with, although you may not have necessarily identified it in the pattern that it comes from in its origin, is Shamor v'Zachor. Okay, those are the two, and you remember that from the lines of the verse of Lecha Dodi, Shamor v'Zachor b'dibur echad. That those are the two motivations of what we are supposed to do in a positive way about the Shabbat. We are supposed to observe it, and we are supposed to remember it. And both of those are operative verbs, shamor from the Ten Commandments, shamor or zachor, because the Ten Commandments appear in the Torah twice, and the wording is a little bit different each time. So we remember it and we observe it, lekadsho, to keep it holy or because of its holiness, whichever way you want to interpret it and translate it. So there are things that we do or that we choose to do or we choose not to do as a matter of observing the Shabbat, as you know, as it would say, here's the list of the 39. Here are the things that you choose not to do, or here are the things that you do in a positive way. I like doing it. If indeed the Shabbat is a symbol of creation, then what we should do is we should recreate, or pronounce it differently, recreate, and on the Shabbat. I don't know whether that means necessarily playing golf or tennis, but recreationally spending time to recreate, refresh ourselves. That certainly would be permissible from my point of view, and would link into this overall theme of remembering and observing, making a connection to the Shabbat. In the prayers, there are two reasons for Shabbat. One is that it's a Zecher L'Maaseh Bereshit. It's a reminder of the act of creation, God creating the world on 7 days, and then resting, God creating the world in 6 days, and then resting on the seventh day. And then the other is Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim, that it's a reminder of going forth out of Egypt. What's the reminder? Is that when we were in Egypt, we were slaves. We didn't have a day off. We didn't have a rest day. So now that we are out of Egypt, now that we are free, that's what we specifically remember. And those are the two motivational statements thematically for that appear in the liturgy, that appear in the prayers of why we have Shabbat, to remind us of God creating the world in 6 days, resting on the seventh, and then also of the institution of having Shabbat as free people rather than as slaves when we couldn't. Yes, Merdel.
This reminds me, you read Herman Wouk's book, This Is My God?
Oh, yes.
It's a beautiful book, talks about Shabbat. If you've read it, if you haven't read it, it's a wonderful book to read.
Till the day he died, Herman Wouk was an Orthodox Jew.
Yeah, it's a lovely
Strongly
book.
practicing Orthodox Jew. Right.
I have a question.
Sherry? Sure.
I had just been wondering about this, and what you're saying is perhaps relating to it. I have heard, don't know if it's rumor, about ultra-Orthodox, that on Friday night, I don't know if it has to do with recreation, about the couple having sex, that's part of.
It's an extra mitzvah. It's a double mitzvah.
No,
Shabbat.
seriously, is that what it is?
Yes, it's a double mitzvah.
Ah, no wonder. Okay.
Yeah.
I wondered about that. Now I know why. Good explanation.
Now you know why. Right.
Okay, thank you.
Right. Okay. I'm gonna push the pause button at this point. I had a little bit more than I wanted to do about Shabbat. And then where do we go from here? Again, still in this overriding curriculum paradigm model of what we do, why we do it, when we do it, and how we do it. We've talked about the life cycle. We've talked about the holidays. My intention, unless someone has strong objection, is to next look at the prayer book, where the prayers, many of them come from, about some of the choreography of what we do, why we do it, or why we don't do it. What's different about the liturgy between the weekday, between Shabbat and then holy days, and spend probably 2, if not 3 weeks focusing on the prayer book, unless there's some other area of Jewish study that people would like to get into. After the prayer book, I wanted to get into an introduction of Jewish text, of sacred text, of look a little bit at, the Torah study people are doing Torah and commentaries, but I wanted to get into Mishnah and Talmud and Midrash, and then some responsa literature. That's where I saw it going, but I'm open to hearing from any or all of you. Everyone speak now or forever hold your peace, right?
Sounds good, great to me.
I'm
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Well, then that's what we'll think of. For the next couple of weeks, we'll be looking at, we'll figure out Shabbat and then go, Shabbat is a segue into talking about the prayer book for a couple of weeks. And then after that, we'll look at some other texts, and I'll try to find out how to get you copies of the particular texts that we would look at.